When we work with the breath, whether it's in some kind of breath work like holotropic breath work or rebirthing breath work, or we're interested in functional breathing practice like Oxygen Advantage or Buteyko, there's one thing that happens in both cases that is often not very readily discussed, and that's the idea of state change. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to 3 different breathing patterns that change the state, change moods, change where you are mentally and emotionally, maybe even spiritually, and it adds an interesting dimension to what you can do when you work with the breath. If you have done holotropic breath work, rebirthing breath work, or even the Wim Hof method, you may have some experience of state change. When we do breathing patterns that utilize breath holds and hyperventilation, we dramatically change the oxygenation of the blood and how much oxygen gets to the brain. We change the balance of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood, which alters the flow of blood and, as I said a moment ago, the flow of oxygen. So there are things that are happening physiologically in the body that alter what's going on in our brain from a physiological point of view. And then there's this almost unknown, as yet really uninvestigated, if that's a word, thing that goes on that may be spiritual. Some researchers are pointing to neurology and neurological pathways that might be somewhat quantum, might have something to do with quantum field theory. And that's very interesting, but it's very new. I don't know a lot about it. I'm still investigating that myself. But it may turn out that a lot of these states, these altered states or non-ordinary states of consciousness, like those that we achieve with breath work, even psychedelics and hypnosis, may be quantum. I don't know, but that's an interesting thing to investigate at some point. So back to breath work and hyperventilation and breath holds, altering that chemistry, that biochemistry, changes what we feel in our bodies. Now that's also true of any breath practice, whether that's pranayama, whether it's something you're doing as a recovery method in fitness pursuits, for example. Everything is changing state in some way. Now you may have an experience of just taking a deep breath when you feel stressed or when you've had a shock. And what that does is it changes your state at the nervous system level. And that's really what we're talking about here. The first practice I'm going to introduce you to comes out of the tradition of what I call therapeutic breath work, like rebirthing and holotropic and shamanic breath work, all of those type of practices that are interested in creating some kind of therapeutic outcome, maybe moving trauma, maybe getting you in touch with inner work, moving stuff, doing shadow work, all of those kind of things. It's very popular right now, and sometimes the mechanisms by which this kind of stuff works is misunderstood. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to a very simple practice. In spirit breath work, the tradition or the practice that I come from, we call this the primer breath, and it's a very simple pattern. Now, normally I would recommend that you breathe through the nose, but for this pattern we actually breathe through the mouth because we're purposefully hyperventilating. And what we do is we breathe 10 breaths in and out of the mouth, connected, a conscious connected breath, very much like what Leonard Orr taught in his rebirthing practice. Then we hold for 10 seconds, we do 20 breaths, 20 cycles, hold for 20 seconds, 30 breaths and hold for 30 cycles. Now that may sound similar to the Wim Hof method if you've done that before, which is effectively 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, and then there's a little bit of add-ons at the end if you want to get a little bit fancy. Now when it comes to functional breath practice, we're not taking as much time to institute this state change. What we're doing is gently altering what we're doing with our breath and becoming more sensitive to what's happening in the body. One is not better than the other. They both bring about state change. And that's what we're talking about in this video, state change. So the first one is to breathe lightly. Now this idea comes from the Oxygen Advantage. However, I'm sure you'll find it in other breath practices as well. Now the idea is quite simply to close your mouth and breathe through your nose and ever so gently soften the breath, just little by little. So you're taking in less air with each breath in. Now the breath stays the same length where you breathe is the same. It's almost the velocity with which you breathe that's changing. You're softening it off. Now, if you were to grab a piece of paper, the idea is to be breathing so gently that that paper is not moving when you breathe in and out. There's a little bit of a rustle in this paper at the moment because I've got an overhead fan going at the moment. It's a little bit warm in this room. If you did it in a still room, you would be able to notice movement, and I'll just demonstrate. It's quite amazing to see. So you can see there that just breathing in and out of the nose does move the paper. Your goal would be to not move the paper. Another thing that you could do, if you don't have paper handy, is just to use your index finger across your nose. And you're just feeling the air passing your finger and softening off that sensation in the finger, which of course would indicate that you're softening off the breath. Now what you're doing here is you're taking in less air, you're taking in less oxygen, you're gently breathing out. So your biochemistry changes. This one can come on really quickly. So again, please ease off gently if you're going to try it yourself. And I would even suggest maybe you do it with a chair back behind you or lying down, because you can get to the point where you get very drowsy with this one. It's actually a practice that I use before bed to move into the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest function of the nervous system. Another way that you can bring about state change with breathing is to lengthen your breath. So if you just stop for a moment, close your mouth and move to your nose breath, just in and out through the nose, and count how long it takes you to breathe in and how long it takes you to breathe out, that will give you a baseline of where you are at the moment. Now for most people it's 2 to 3 seconds in or out. If you were to extend that out to 5 seconds in or out, what you do is you only get 6 cycles of breathing per minute, which is less than half of what you would normally be doing. So you're slowing down your breathing, you're down regulating your nervous system and bringing about a state change which would be relaxing, would be calming, would be easing. So back to the first one that we talked about, that hyperventilation and the breath holds. So back to that first pattern that we talked about, the primer breath, that's actually stimulating the body. We're hyperventilating, we're almost doing too much, and then we're holding the breath, which again is a stress. That's not calming. So that has one particular type of state change. The second two, the breathe light, and the third one that we called cadence breathing, have the effect of easing off and relaxing the nervous system. What's interesting about the first breath, the primer breath, is you effectively stress out your body, but when you come back to normal, you almost enter a deeper state of relaxation than before you started. So in effect, each of these 3 patterns help to relax the body in some way. Now, of course, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different ways that you can breathe, and each will change your state in a different way. What I would suggest, if you're interested and you want to go down the rabbit hole, is to just practice, become more sensitive to what's happening in your body, and then find someone who has the skills and the knowledge to help you if you want to go even further.